unapologetic atheist interracial couple's progressive response to the fucking internet.
Hello and welcome to Unapologetics, the unapologetic progressive skeptic's response to the fucking internet. I am Brently, and unfortunately Nikki isn't here with me today. She had to work a little bit later, but today we have DB Ramsey DB Ramsey of the author of the book, and I love this. This is so cool. Speaking of God, we don't know shit. And how you doing, DB?
Hey, good, Brent. Yeah, call me Dave. Yeah, call me Dave, Brent.
Dave.
Good, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Yep.
No, I like that you did that too. You took the two initial. That's so classy. You know, that's a classy move.
Well, it was actually more practical than classy because there's another Dave Ramsey out there in the internet world who, if you haven't heard of him, he does the financial planning for the religious community, and
the money man.
He owns, the money man. And he owns Google. So my publicist said, we got to do something with the name. And I wanted to keep, my real name. So we started doing derivations. My full name is David Blair Ramsey. So we tried David Blair, and he kept popping up. So we tried DB. And the only other thing that popped up with DB, there's a football player named, I think it's Jalen Ramsey. He's a defensive back. So that's why it's DB. It's very practical. It may sound classy, but it was more practical than anything else.
No, that's cool. Yeah, it's funny. Like with me, I was trying to, decide on a name and stuff because as an atheist podcaster, it's kind of scary. You don't want to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't want to put your name. So I was like, can I just do like Cher and just be Brently? You know what I mean? It's like, that's it. That's just the one name. That's all. And it's funny because it kind of, on Facebook when I was putting it out, I put Brent. And then for a time, they kind of demanded you had a last name. And so I put Lee as the last name. And now I'm stuck with it. So it says Brently. And, and I don't think half the people get the joke, but it's all right. But no, okay. No, that's cool. Well, man, I finished your book today, honestly. And because I had ordered it when we had discussed doing the show. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to have enough time to read this book because I'm dyslexic. I have a hard time with, reading books. But, man, I flew through this thing. I got to say.
Cool.
I actually, I was really impressed that I was able to just stay engaged and keep on going. But it's such a good book. Like, it's such an easy read. And so, I don't know, and I'm really into this kind of stuff. So maybe that might account for some of it. But man, it was such
well, thank you. I appreciate that. I take that as a compliment. Yeah, it's not a long book, but you don't have to write a 300-page tome to have a good book. I mean, I think of Sam Harris's books, Letter to a Christian Nation and The End of Faith. I don't think those were more than 100 pages, if that.
No,
but they're packed. They're packed with meaning and packed with the message. So I was a little concerned when I submitted the manuscript, thinking, is there enough here for a book? But that, hearing your response there is validation that it was just right.
Oh yeah, no, it was perfect. Like it was right in there, and there, like you said, it's packed with just good shit. And like I love the way that you put these inserts in there, and that was super cool too. Because now I know like the other things that I have to like jump out to and read, because I'm a fairly new atheist.
Yeah, I tried to put a teaser or a quote for the beginning of each chapter, and often it was lifted from the chapter, but just to kind of give the reader an idea of what they were about to encounter in that chapter. So I'm glad you liked that.
Oh yeah, no, that was awesome. I definitely enjoyed going through because sometimes it's like you want to pull from, like you want to say something but you're in reference to something else, and you don't want to just say it like and reword it. You want to like give the credit, and be like, hey, here's
absolutely.
how I got, and give the little. That's super cool. I like that. It's really cool. It's like that's sort of like us playing clips. We just but. So one of the first things I wanted to talk to you about, and this was something because like I was saying, I'm fairly new atheist. It's like within the past 4 years, about when Trump was coming out, his campaigning and stuff. That's when things started to fall apart real quick there.
I was going to say that should have moved a lot of people to atheism if that's your job. Anyway, that's another topic. But go ahead, Brent. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, but you're absolutely right, because that was once people started defending this guy. I'm just like, hold on. Am I even a Republican? Yeah. What is a Republican? I don't even think I know. And then and the cracks in the foundation just it didn't take long for it all to come crumbling down. But one of the things that I did a lot, and I remember, and I believe that it was page 34 that you referenced this, was selective censoring of information confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Where you will purposefully, and it's almost like in your head that you're doing this, that you're like, oh, no, I don't want that information. Let's find the article that matches. Yeah. Oh, here it is. Answers in Genesis. They got the answer right there. There we go. And it's like a way of just ignoring information on purpose, and only taking in the information that comes from your particular bubble, And so I was wondering, did you have a similar experience with that?
Well, that's why we're talking, Brent, because as a minister and even before, I read dissenting viewpoints, and in graduate school. Any graduate school in religion, whether it be a divinity school, whether it be a state school, you should study the subject, from an academic perspective, which means objectively, which means, reading all sides of the arguments. And, Christian apologists, and there are scores of them out there, they can defend the faith very easily, and they can point to scholarship, but I kind of looked at faith as maybe an attorney would. If you're the prosecuting attorney, you better understand the theory of the case that the defense attorney is trying to present, and vice versa. And so I say this in my book. I would always challenge my congregations. I would remind them of Socrates saying that an unexamined life is not worth living, and I would argue that an unexamined faith is not worth having. So I read. I was always reading not just apologetics to support my view, but I wanted to read, other works that critiqued my beliefs and my views, and I did that. And some of that began in graduate school. Some of that I continued, into ministry. And when all was said and done, I arrived at a much different place than when I started, and that's okay. That's not a bad thing. I'm not lamenting that. I'm glad that happened. And I'm glad that it happened when I was relatively young. I was 35, and I started my life over again. But no, I think we're all, to some extent, I say all, guilty of confirmation bias, whether it be politically, religiously. We tend to live in an echo chamber, and I know a lot of people who've lived in the same echo chamber of religion for most of their lives. My mother was one of those. My mother never heard a voice outside of the church that she had been in for most of her life. Unless, we were talking, and my mom and I would have, spirited theological discussions and debates. But most people, they don't know where the holes are. And I'm going to speak about Christianity because that's the only religion with which I'm intimately familiar. But I'm, over 95% of Christians, I'm convinced, have no idea about the problems, historical, critical, scholarly problems that there are with their faith. And some would say, well, I don't care. I don't need that. I accept my faith. Well, that's fine. But then, you're on the same ground and footing as any other person of any religious faith. You're not in a place of superiority. If you don't know where the holes are, in your own belief system, then you in no way can or should critique someone else's belief system, because there are holes, believe me. There are holes that you can drive a truck through.
Oh yeah. And it's funny that you said that, because it's like, you wanted to go look at the opposite sides, arguments and whatnot. And I always thought it was so dishonest when people, our church would do this whole thing where they would be like, they would give this powerful message now, and there's these people in the crowd, and this is their first time there. They're just, and they were moved by the message, and they're like, man, if the Lord Jesus has moved you today, then stand up in front of everybody, and I'm going to point to you and go, I see you, sir, and that it's how they come to know Christ. And it's like, they don't know that now they have to accept that a talking donkey is something that's reasonable to believe. You know what I mean? Like they're just standing up because they were moved by the message, right? And it just feels so dishonest because they don't know, they don't know all the other things that they have to accept along with being a Republican. Like that's just, hey, you got to do that. That's part of the unwritten rules as far as that was the way my church was anyway. It was like, oh, okay, we got to get you switched from Democrat to Republican. Okay.
Yeah.
But
I didn't, the church that I grew up in, I wasn't aware of political distinctions, and it just, I just don't think it was brought up, but I was brought up in a probably a conservative Baptist church, not fundamentalist, not liberal, but probably conservative. And there were things that I questioned as a child, not a lot, because I really didn't develop critical thinking skills. I'm embarrassed to say until grad school. In college, I was not taught to think critically. I majored in religion at a then Baptist college called Wake Forest University. It wasn't until grad school at Duke when I had professors who challenged me. What do you think about this?
Right.
And, I remember the first time I started reading texts and felt empowered, to take on a writer, whether the writer had a PhD or 2 PhDs, but to challenge assumptions and premises and conclusions. And it really opened up a new world to me. And I continued to read things that challenged my belief system. It was funny. I was in a study group with some peers. Like there were 4 of us in Charlottesville, Virginia. And each month we would pick a book and we would all read it, and then one of us would write, a review of it. And I was the guy that was always picking out the book that challenged Christianity, and it made these guys uncomfortable. But that was kind of who I was, and but yet my faith remained intact. I mean, coming out of divinity school, I was at a different place with respect to Christianity. But Brent, most ministers are more liberal than their congregations just by virtue of theological education. You can't come out of that, and be at the same place if you've been to a place that really examines religion critically. And a lot of ministers kind of make peace with that. They're like, okay, there's some things I just don't believe and can't believe anymore because I know them not to be true. But you rationalize and you existentialize, and I did that. But then I started moving from, okay, I'm not sure about Christianity to I'm not sure about God, and that's when I really started.
The big one.
Probably. Yeah, that was the big one, because I arrived at this place. I arrived at the place where I said, I don't know, and I don't think we can know. And if we don't know and we can't know, then the very next words that we utter are utterly and necessarily and inescapably conjecture. You may believe, you may hope, you may wish, but you do not know. Right. And I became comfortable with not knowing. I became comfortable with mystery. And that's fine if you're sitting in the pew. I like to say, Christianity for some is like a parlor game. It's nice. It's a part of your life, but it's not your career. When you are making money, from people sitting in those pews as a minister, it's a totally different proposition. And I tried to make it work. I tried to rationalize, but in the end, for me, it was a matter of integrity. I could just no longer continue to make the intellectual, nods and winks and hedges, and I walked away, and I have no regrets.
Because you're not being honest. It's like it's almost, that was what I've really felt like. I wasn't being honest with myself, and by extension with others either. Like I was lying to myself about what I thought I knew.
Yeah, I arrived at what I would call agnosticism, and I'm comfortable in saying I think agnosticism is the most intellectually honest worldview because we don't know. We just don't.
Yeah.
And I don't think we can know. And so, I arrived at that place. I was comfortable with it, but I just did not think that, my congregation, I thought they wanted more. I had those that came up, to my office in the days and weeks after I resigned. And I was kind of oblique when I announced it to the congregation, but they would come by and say, okay, why are you really leaving? Because they didn't believe me. They thought, somebody had pissed me off or whatever.
Right.
And I would, I would unpack it a little more. I would be a little more explicit. And there were some that said, you could have stayed here, and perhaps that's true. And I will tell you, Brent, there are more ministers than you would imagine who are millimeters away from my agnosticism. They've either made, kind of the intellectual rationalization to say, okay, I'm not really there, but I can still do the job, and I can kind of existentialize God and religion. And then there are some, quite frankly, when you get a certain age, there's not much else you can do. And so those people are kind of stuck. I was 35. I didn't know what I was going to do next. But I knew that as long as I had a brain and a mouth, I'd find out a way to make money, and I did, and I have. So you pop me into a congregation, let me listen to about 4 sermons. I'll tell you exactly where that ministry is in the spectrum of theism versus atheism, and you'd be surprised how many are right, probably in the middle of agnosticism, and maybe closer to atheism. But they wink and they nod. And they go about their business.
Right. I got to ask real quick, because this is one that always got me. And as I became an atheist, it really got me. Did you ever because you were a minister for 10 years, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Did you ever do the faith is a fucking, like you have faith like a fucking chair thing?
Tell me what you mean by that.
Okay, so I've heard this sermon, like I swear I've heard it 1,000 times, where they're like, oh, well, you have faith that this chair will hold you up, and that's just the same as what faith is, that this chair will hold your weight. And
No, I never heard that analogy. I think it's a pretty shitty analogy, because I can look at a chair and I know that it's a chair, and I know that it's real and objective, and and faith is far from real and objective. I mean, it's if it weren't, it would not be faith. It would be just a matter. We wouldn't even be having this conversation. No, I would
That's
say,
funny.
Brent, I was rarely. I wasn't much of an apologist for the faith. I wasn't that kind of minister.
You're like, I was already doing this before I was doing this.
Yeah, I always kind of thought, if this God's big enough to defend himself, he doesn't need me doing this, for him. So, I focused more on the existential and probably the earthly Jesus than I did trying to convince people that there is a God. I just wasn't that kind. I wasn't an apologist for God. I wasn't an apologist, for Christianity. It was it was a given. It was just was one of those givens, and that's the problem. When it stopped being a given, for me, when it wasn't a given, then things changed. But no, I never did the chair thing, and I never tried to convince people that there was a God. It was just assumed. That was just it. If you walk into a congregation, you just assume that there are certain givens, and one is that there's a God, and the other is that, Jesus, at least in the Christian perspective, was either God incarnate or, the highest manifestation of Godness. I mean, there are a lot of ways to look at Jesus, but those two things were almost givens. And so I never really I never felt like I had to convince people about either.
That's so funny. Yeah. See, I was with the Calvary Chapel whole movement that came from Chuck Smith in California and all that. And we had, it's very different. It was like you could dress however you wanted and everything, but it was still very, very strict. But.
Well, I'll tell you what. So, Brent, to give you an idea of kind of my approach to theology and Christianity. One Easter Sunday, and Easter is the one Sunday of the year when the place is packed. Everybody comes out for Easter Sunday.
Oh yeah.
And I essentially I preached a sermon in which I told the congregation, I'm going to present both sides of the argument this morning for Jesus' resurrection
on an Easter Sunday.
On Easter Sunday, and I said, I'm satisfied that very few of you even know that there's another side and that there are problems with this story. And I said, I'm going to deliver the case for the prosecution, and then I'm going to deliver the case for the defense, and then I'll wrap it up. And I did that. I presented the holes. I said, here are the problems. And at the end, I had more people than not that said, I've never heard that other side, which is astonishing. I mean, for many, including myself, the resurrection is kind of the linchpin of Christianity. You pull that linchpin out, or so, I reasoned, and the Jenga tower falls, because that was what I had always thought distinguished Jesus from, other godlike people.
Yeah, and honestly, that was what I thought about when reading your book. I was like, that that the person that was consoling you was saying that, and I was like, what? No, that can't, dude. That's the whole that's the end all be all of Christianity.
Yeah, and the problem, Brent, is real simple, and it goes to the dating of the New Testament. And the dating of the New Testament is a settled matter among New Testament scholars, whether you're at Wheaton or whether you're at Harvard or whether you're at Bob Jones University or whether you're at Yale. The dating of the New Testament is a settled matter, and it's simply this. Paul is the earliest New Testament writing. I believe First Thessalonians is probably the earliest, maybe in the early 40s. But when Paul is writing in 1 Corinthians 15 and defending the resurrection, and this is probably written, 45 A.D., Paul refers to a tradition that Jesus was buried and raised. That's all he says. But Paul doesn't, Paul appeals to appearances of Jesus. Paul doesn't call out the empty tomb story. Well, that's a problem, because the empty tomb story doesn't appear until about 25 years later in Mark. So Mark is the earliest gospel. Again, this is a settled matter among New Testament scholars. This is not up for debate. Mark is considered the earliest gospel, written around 70 A.D. Matthew and Luke at points copy Mark verbatim. You can put the Greek manuscripts side by side, and you see where Matthew and Luke copy Mark verbatim at places. And then Matthew and Luke have their own material. But my point is this: Paul, writing in 45, does not mention the empty tomb. He could have closed the deal. If he's presenting the case for the prosecution, all he has to do is play that card. He doesn't do it.
Because
why doesn't he do it? Why doesn't Paul refer to the empty tomb? Is it because he doesn't think it's relevant to his argument? Well, no, that would be like a prosecuting attorney saying, I have the gun, I have a DNA, I have a footprint, I have a fingerprint, but I don't need to introduce that. Or was Paul unaware? Was Paul unaware of that story? And if he's unaware, how could a story that big be unknown? Or, and here's the scholarly rub, had that story not been invented yet? And Brent, here's the deal: if you believed your guy was God in that period, in that time, there were three things that you had to have in your guy's narrative. You had to have a miraculous birth, you had to have miracles during life, and you had to have something miraculous post-death. Those were table stakes. If your guy did not have those table stakes, you didn't get a seat at the table.
Right.
And oh, by the way, Jesus wasn't the only quote-unquote God in that time. Nero, Domitian, Caesar, again, they all had those in their narratives. And if Jesus didn't have that in his narrative, he didn't get a seat at the table. So you tell me, if there wasn't scholarly mischief occurring sometime between 45 AD, when Paul doesn't call out the empty tomb, and 70 AD, when Mark makes it the center point, or actually the end of his gospel.
Right, because to this day, the empty tomb is the best evidence they've got. That's the only thing that connects the story to reality.
Yeah, but just think about it. If you were reading that story, put scholarship aside. If you're reading that story from any other perspective and from any other culture, you're going to go, it's myth. I mean, a tomb is empty. There's a man in a white robe. I mean, it doesn't pass the sniff test. But because it was taught to you as a child and beaten into your head, you come to take it as history. The problem is that there's no validation of that outside of the New Testament. It would be like turning in a term paper in college and citing the term paper in your bibliography, and that being the only thing in your bibliography.
Hey, I said it here, so it's got to be true. Because look at the bibliography. It cites my fucking paper, man.
Absolutely. There is no mention of Jesus in any Roman literature, art, music of that period. Zero, nada, not a mention of Jesus in any Roman literature in that time. So you tell me if what we're reading is historical. Now, was there a historical Jesus? Most likely, yes. And how do
maybe
what
multiple? I mean, there could be multiple people because that was a popular thing at the time.
Yeah, that was a popular name. But Josephus, who was the well-known and maybe the most prominent Jewish historian, in his Antiquities, references Jesus in a footnote. A
single footnote. Right.
In the footnote, he notes this Jesus, who was a teacher of wisdom, had followers, was killed and alleged to have appeared. That's it. Now, there are post Josephus kind of additions that some people believe were inserted centuries later to bolster the case for Jesus. But when you only occupy a footnote in Jewish history, and yet the scriptures have you as being God, there's a little disconnect there. Probably tells you a lot about what the agenda of those that wrote the Gospels was, and I think it's arguably to promote the belief that their guy was God. Yeah.
And that's why I always say, because when I talk about the historicity of Jesus with Christians, and I've done it several times with probably my entire family, and other folks that I knew and stuff. I always say, go ahead and when we're done with this conversation, just Google when Josephus was born, and then we'll be done with this, because it was well after the fact. And then not even to mention, hey, since it's Christmas, I actually want to ask you a couple things about the Christmas story, right? So you seem to you've looked into this, correct? Like you know the Christmas story, right?
Yeah, a few times. Yeah, I've read it.
All right,
times,
let's do this. Okay, so were thousands of Jewish children murdered by King Herod anywhere in history?
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of historical evidence for that. That seems to be, either not true historically or the dating is wrong. But no, I don't think there are. Scholars would use the word extra biblical. I don't think there are extra biblical historical sources that would support that. I could be wrong, but I don't think so.
So okay, so that's one, right? So that's one of the things that doesn't make sense, correct? So another would be the fact that what was it? The fact that the census doesn't make sense, right? I mean that shit just is weird, right?
Yeah, I don't think there's extra biblical evidence for that either. But beyond that, but even if there was, you still have to deal with the what now to me clearly seems to be myth, the miracles, the resurrection, so many things that, again, if you read the story, if you were in another culture, you would just dismiss it as myth. I mean, people dismiss or some Mormonism, right. and luckily, the Mormon faith is close enough in history that there are, we do have evidence that we know there was a Joseph Smith. We also know he was a charlatan. That he was kicked out of town after town because he was a huckster.
He's a con man, straight up.
He's a con. He's a con man. And but the history of the New Testament is so far removed from us. It's a little more difficult. But the history of that time can and has been reconstructed. And outside of that clearly biased document or documents called the New Testament, there just isn't a lot of supporting evidence for any of that other than in those documents.
Right. It's not like other documents that we would consider historical, right? Like it's not.
Yeah.
It doesn't, like you just said, extra biblical evidence that, because generally, history is messy, right? Like it's hard to sometimes conclude what actually happened, right? But we have ways of figuring it out. You know what I mean? And the Bible doesn't check any of the boxes. That's the problem. The historians are no, here's how we figure out what happened in history. And you got to check this box, you got to check that. We got to make sure it's all it all makes sense based upon like these parameters, and they don't check any of the boxes at all.
Yeah, I keep going back to the dating of the New Testament. I mean, particularly, Paul. Paul doesn't write about the miraculous birth. Paul doesn't write about the miracles. Paul doesn't, call out the empty tomb. So why not? I mean, Paul's writing in 45. Why does he not talk about what we read in the Gospels? Because the Gospels aren't written in. Now, there may have been oral traditions floating around, but that's a problem when the earliest writer is not referencing that. And again, if you believed you got to be God, you had to have those things in his narrative. And so, if I were Brent asked what one book, if I had to give any book to any either believer or non-believer to really understand what we're talking about, it wouldn't be my book, by the way. It would be Bart Ehrman's How Jesus Became God.
Yeah,
it's a fascinating look at that process, and Bart does a really good job. He opens the book and he tells the story, and you think he's talking about Jesus, because it is Jesus, and it's his birth, it's everything. And then he pulls the tada, and the tada is that who he's writing about is a guy named Apollonius of Tyene. I think I may have the last name wrong, but it's like a total swerve. And you're going, oh my God! I thought he was telling the story of Jesus, and then he takes the reader on this historical excavation of how Jesus became God, not how God became Jesus, which is the underpinning of Christian theology. No, it's not how God. It's how Jesus, through literary conventions, became God. It's fascinating. That's a book that I would give before I would give my book or any other book on the matter.
Yeah. I mean, it was almost a book about how we said, you or I wrote a book about how David Koresh was fucking Jesus, was the son of God. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like it's absolutely. And speaking of Koresh, Brent, one of the arguments that the apologists have used throughout the ages, and I heard this growing up, is but those disciples and followers, they were willing to die for him. They were martyrs, and so that must tell you something. Yeah. Oh, it doesn't tell me something. It tells me they're fucking crazy. I mean, look at David Koresh. Exactly.
Look at what people have said about Trump. I would die for him. I mean, people are fucking crazy.
They would.
Crazy people die for crazy things. And that argument, when I was a kid, was compelling. So I'm like, wow, yeah. But it's actually, to me, it's an incredibly weak argument when you look at what crazy people have done in the name of religion, for religion, and Koresh is at the top of that list.
Yeah, well, and it's just like 9/11's fucked because,
absolutely.
You know what I mean? Because it's like, oh, my religion, because they died for it, it must be true. Oh, shit, now I have to believe in the Muslim religion because of 9/11. Like, no, that's not the way, like, knowing true things works. Like, honestly, like, as far as, why people do things doesn't make, it doesn't speak to its truthfulness at all, Yeah, you could make the argument. I mean, you look at the ones that flew the planes into the towers. I mean, I'm satisfied they believed that they were on a mission from God, and that when they died, they would see whatever number of virgins. I'm satisfied they believed that passionately. They had to do those horrible things. And to me, that's no different than saying, well, those people that followed Jesus that's how much they believed in him. Well, that's just not persuasive. And you point to 9/11 as an example of, religion going crazy. But you can be passionate, you can believe passionately, but you can also be crazy. Yeah. I mean, so far, the only people.
I'm not saying believing in Jesus or God is crazy, but, when you make the argument that those, Jesus had to be God because those people would not have given up their lives and, for him, that just doesn't hold water with me anymore.
Yeah. See, the only people that were actually on a mission from God that I can see are the Blues Brothers, because that's a movie and it's all pretend.
Yeah, Jake and Elwood. Oh man, I had that album as a kid. Oh my gosh,
so good. It's the best. I swear, to this day, I deem it as the best musical. It's my favorite.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, that brought back memories right there.
But so one of the coolest parts of the book, in my opinion, it's just me, But it was great the way that because I've actually been on missions trips, and I've done missionary work and whatnot. And so you did this whole part about the Book of Mormon and these Mormons going to this other culture, right? And they're all like out there screaming stuff, and they're doing their thing, and they're saying this. And can you say the words that they're saying? Because I could not.
Yeah. Yeah, have you seen the Book of Mormon?
I haven't, so that's why the words when the song I was like, I don't know what those are, how that's pronounced.
So the song and it's a song and a prayer that the Ugandans sing is called Hasa Diga Ibawai. And so the two Mormon missionaries have been sent to Uganda, and they encounter these villagers where 80% of the villagers have AIDS, they're malnourished, they're starving. And they teach these Mormons this song they sing in troubled times, Hasa Diga Ibawai. So the guys are singing along, and then one of the guys says, wait, what exactly does that mean? Right. And the guy's like, well, Ibawai is God, and Hasa Diga means fuck you. So fuck you, God. And what I didn't put in the book is that it's fuck you, God, in the cunt, mouth, and ass.
Wow.
And
okay.
Yeah, I mean, and so depending upon your view, that's either the high water or low water mark of that musical. But I remember the first time I saw it, and this couple walked out, but they walked out like 2 songs later. I'm thinking, man, if you made it through that song, you're home free, because I can't imagine it getting more crude than this. But the point I make in the
right?
the point I make in the book, Brent, and the reason that I include that is that I contend that in most religious worship services, the whole time is spent praising God. I say jerking God off for an hour. Oh, you're wonderful. We praise you. We thank you. We love you. Yeah. Where are the WTF prayers, though? Because you can't have it both ways. You can't spend an hour jerking God off and then not holding him accountable for the bad stuff.
Right.
And I'm not saying God, if there's a God, that the God's responsible for the bad, but it's like a game of heads I win, tails you lose. So I point that song out as an example of prayer. I argue that song is a form of prayer because they're brutally and utterly honest about their plight. Right. And there's nothing positive about their lives. And these Mormons come in and they say, well, tell us something bad that happened today. Well, our luggage got lost, and first world problems. But the Ugandans have real, third world problems, and I just highlight that song as a better example of prayer. Or if you're going to have the praise and the thanks, you got to have a section for the WTF prayers.
Yeah.
You're just letting God off the hook too easily.
Because anybody in reality, like that is the only time that anybody ever does that. Is that like they're gonna like if like politicians give me fucking politicians, like they will sit there and we'll give them all the credit for the things that they do, but when they fuck something up, we're going to be the first to say something about it. You know what I mean? Like, we're not doing this. Where is your logic at? Like, it's so logically inconsistent to sit there and go, no, I'm going to praise you. I'm going to worship you. I'm going to, for all the good things that happen. But all the bad stuff, no. It's not you that's responsible. It's the devil. Yeah. It's the devil, man. Yeah. It's a fallen world. And what? He's in control of all of it. What are you talking about?
And here's the thing, Brent. I think, and I'm not saying you have to drop F-bombs, during a worship service, but there would be nothing inappropriate about having a even 2 minutes, but just hey God, just by the way, man, we're kind of pissed. COVID, really?
Like why?
You did this whole, you created this whole world thing. You did a pretty good job, but man, dude, you're falling down the job. You're falling asleep on the job. And if there's a God, that God should be big enough to handle that. And they go, yeah, I screwed up. You know what? Yeah, I did not create a perfect world. There are flaws in my creation. I say in my book, the writer of Genesis, ascribes language to God who created the world and said, behold, it is good. And I say in the book, probably the writer should have said, it's okay, it'll do, because it's not a perfect world. And it's not a very good world. It depending upon where you live. if you live in the Western world and you're white and privileged, life's pretty good. But go to Uganda, where the Mormon missionaries encounter these natives, and life's pretty shitty. And you can't let God off the hook for that. So I'm glad you enjoyed that part of the book.
Oh man, yeah, I loved it, and it's funny because like it kind of brought to mind one of my biggest what the fuck moments. It's coming at it's like I said, I'm recently I'm more recent as someone who's come out as an atheist, and it was the whole like you were just talking about was like the fall of man and everything, and one of the things that I was always told was, it's messed up, because people always say, hey, it's messed up that we got to go to hell. And Christians would always say, hey, but hell wasn't actually meant for us. Like, we just sort of got caught in the crossfire. It was actually for Satan and his demons. Yet, he didn't put Satan in the planet that he created him for, or that he created for him. That just fucking blew my mind. That was like a mind blow at that point. I was like, oh my fucking God. Like, how did I miss that? Like, growing up.
Well, but I'll take it, I'll rewind for you. And I would argue, Brent, that heaven and hell are literary constructs. And here's what I mean by that. So in the Old Testament, or in that period, if you had asked someone if they were going to go to heaven or hell, they wouldn't have known what you were talking about, because there was no word for hell. In the ancient Near East of the Old Testament, it was widely believed that when you died, everyone went to the same place. And the Hebrew word for that is Sheol, S-H-E-O-L, even though there aren't vowels in Hebrew.
That was so bizarre. I was like, what?
Yep, good, bad, rich, poor. Everybody goes to the same place. But at the same time, they believed that goodness and badness are rewarded and punished in this lifetime. So good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. Then you had writers like starting with the psalmist and the writer of the book of Job and Ecclesiastes, who started pushing back and going, whoa, no, bad things do happen to good people and good things do happen to bad people. Well, if that's true, and then everybody goes to the same place when they die, you have an imbalance in the divine scales of justice. So guess what happens, and guess what starts appearing in the literature of that period around 200 AD? You start seeing a bifurcated afterlife, and you start seeing this notion of a place where bad people go. Now, in the New Testament, the word for hell is Gehenna. Gehenna was an actual place outside of Jerusalem. It at one point had been a place where children were sacrificed when people believed that that's what the gods required. But at the time of Jesus, it was a place where garbage was burned and fires just smoldered all the time. So when Jesus said it would be best for someone to be tossed into hell, Gehenna, than to mislead a child, people would have said, oh, yeah, that garbage dump. No, who wants to go there? So I make the argument in my book, and this is not original with me, Brent. There's nothing original in my book other than my story. There's nothing new under the sun.
All this shit is old. It's all right.
Absolutely.
We can't help it.
Heaven and hell, in my opinion, in my judgment, in my study, heaven and hell are literary constructs, nothing more and nothing less. And they can easily be viewed in that manner if you study them from an academic perspective, but you're never going to get that in the pulpit. Maybe because a minister himself or herself has never been exposed to that, but they should, because those are important concepts, and it's important to understand their literary origins to realize, and it's why I sleep like a baby at night. These are literary constructs. They don't necessarily refer to places, and you can see that very easily.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's okay. Yeah, no, that's an interesting thing and you're right that we tend to. All these concepts are old. Like we've been talking about this shit forever. It seems. I'm talking like Aristotle had stuff talking about having, and it's like, and then other people like countered it, and it's like, wow, when are we ever going to be done with this? That's my question. What's the point when we can say that, hey, this debate's done, y'all? Well, I've wondered privately, at what point will we ever, I say we as a civilization, or even we as a country, at what point will there be more agnostics or atheists than believers? And because if you look at, if you look at the trajectory of history, and
I'm not sure if it was Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins who famously said, atheists are just like Christians. We just go one God further. Christians and Jews reject the hundreds of gods that have appeared and disappeared, throughout the ages. But agnostics and atheists just go one God further. So, and I'm thinking, well, is it going to be 100 years? Is it 1,000? But then judging from this past political season and the election and how many 60 million people that voted for arguably not the worst presidents ever, but maybe just one of the most despicable human beings ever.
Right.
No, we are eons away from when our country arrives at an agnostic worldview. Because if you believe the guy that lies 10 times a day, whether he needs to or not, no, you're going to believe in anything. You'll believe in the God of the Bible. You'll believe in Jesus. Absolutely. So I think it's going to be, many, if it ever occurs, it's going to be hundreds of years and not, in my lifetime.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. Honestly, I don't think it's going to be in our lifetimes. Probably, even me. I'm 35 or 36, and I've just recently become a skeptic. I was always a believer and whatnot until about, like I said, about 4 years ago, a little over. But and it's these things that come in, that people believe, it's so they're so easily driven to believe things, and that's what's so scary. And I thought, when you would think that the access to all of the wealth of human knowledge and your access to it at a press of a finger, it should make us smarter, and somehow it's made us fucking dumber. Like, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think some of that goes back to the confirmation bias that you opened the show with. I mean, and again, I think we're all guilty of that. Both parties, people of all stripes. But I think the right. The news they get is very carefully curated. It's usually from one source. And Brent, to show you kind of how I live, I start my day every morning with a product of Fox News. It's called the Wall Street Journal, and I usually disagree with the editorials. It's the best business reporting and has been, in my opinion.
Well, absolutely.
But I read the editorials, and just because I'm still open to a different point of view, make an argument, persuade me, appeal to facts and evidence and science. I've already proven my mind can change. I mean, my mind has changed fundamentally as an adult, and I'm open to that. But I do think that some get a very carefully curated news feed, every day, and this, again, I think the same is true, with religion. But I wanted to pick up on something you just said, Brent, because you talked about just at the press of a finger. I do think the Mormon Church has suffered, a lot of defections because its history is more recent. And with the press of a finger, you can read about Joseph Smith. And the guy was just he was a charlatan. He was a huckster.
He was so obviously, a grifter.
And the Mormon Church doesn't want you pressing that finger and putting him in the Google search engine, because we do have the historical record. Again, unfortunately, we don't have the same access to the history of the New Testament as we do of Mormonism, but we have enough, Brent, to arrive at the conclusions that you and I are talking about. There's enough out there. You just have to dig a little bit, and you have to be open and objective in what you're evaluating. So, but yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, it really is. And it's like we were just saying that it's we don't have good reason to think it's true. And that's it. That's enough for me to be like, I'm agnostic like you. I'm agnostic. Like, I don't know if it's true. Like, but the way that I hold my position is one of such that a cult could come out tomorrow and demonstrate that their God exists under scientific scrutiny, and I never would have been wrong.
You never what, Brent?
I never would have been wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like, I never said that a God couldn't exist. Like, I never said any of that. Like, that's not my position. You know what I mean? But as long as they can come out and demonstrate it to be true, okay, then I'm ready to accept it. But the
Yeah,
fact,
just to go back to your chair analogy, show me the chair.
yeah.
Show me the chair that's holding me up. That's all I need to see. Show me the chair. Show me. And some would say, "Oh, but look at creation," and I would say, "Okay, the world is a pretty interesting place, and how it got here. Even if we posit that there was this explosion billions of years ago, yeah, that's pretty fucking amazing.
Hell yeah.
And I'm willing to be open to the possibility that there was some cosmic cause, but I stopped there.
That's it. That's all it is a cause, and we don't know what it is.
I stopped there and go, you know what? It's pretty effing cool, and maybe there's something behind that, but I stopped talking then, because the very next thing I say after that is going to be conjecture. So
Right.
I stop at awe and mystery, and I say, you know what? I embrace mystery, and I cite there was a scholar at Harvard, Gordon Kaufman, and he wrote a book called In the Face of Mystery, and he essentially constructed a systematic theology around this very notion of mystery. It's fascinating. It's a heavy read, but when I read it, as I was kind of going through my crisis of faith, I'm like, wow, this is a pretty cool way, or a pretty cool way to construct theology. I just didn't think it's where people in the pew were. But if we all could just approach life to say, you know what, it's a mystery, and it's a wonderful mystery, but just stop there and go, that's all we can say. The next thing we say is just a guess.
Yeah,
that's
it's
all
just
it is.
making up answers, man. And then you can't and then you get so invested in those made up answers that you won't accept the truth even if it's presented to you.
Yeah, and I think that gets exacerbated because when a lot of religious belief starts with young children, and I devote a good bit of my book to that.
Yeah.
You give me a child, say starting at age 5 or 6, you give me that child one day a week for 52 weeks out of the year, and I will construct an elaborate mythology in which the sun is God, the moon is God's wife, the stars are God's children. And I will create a mythology around that. And by the time you're 13 or 14, you'll believe that with all your heart and soul. Yeah. And by the time you're an adult, if someone attacks that, it's like attacking you.
You get angry.
To me, that's the insidious and pernicious side of religion, because it starts in the fertile, undeveloped minds of children, and I think that's just flat wrong. It's just flat wrong.
Dude, you're absolutely right about that, because like I can tell you just based on my anecdotal. I mean, of course, this is anecdotal, but it's my experience of like when people would attack, and I went for a particular. I was super involved. I went to church every single day. I was very involved. I was the music minister. I did all these things. Right, and I left the church for a significant amount of time, and when I was out there doing my thing, I was still a Christian. I never disavowed my faith or anything like that. And when people would talk shit about religion, because now I was around people that I wasn't used to being around, and they would talk shit about religion a lot of times, and that to me felt like they were talking shit about my mom. You know what I mean? It was like a yo mama joke.
I think you're onto something. I think we're onto something there. I mean, as I've tried to make sense of the how many ever million people voted for Orange Man, I think that people became so identified with him that if you attack him, you're attacking them. Right. And if you're attacking, because what you're saying is you're effing stupid. How could you do this? You've made a mistake. Well, they personalize their loyalty to him so much that when someone attacks him, it's like you said, it's like attacking your mom. That's the only way I can make sense out of the phenomenon that is his followers, which is still just mind blowing.
Because we're a conservative family, we're a Republican family. It's almost the same as saying we are a Christian family. You know what I mean? Like this is, hey, he's part of this family. We are a Christian family, and that gets into your brain, man. Like you just like, yeah, we're a Christian family. And you just kind of go with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As far as, and so when somebody attacks that, that's who you feel they are attacking. It's not the concept. It's not the beliefs. It's that person, in your life that said, we are a Christian family.
Yeah. You've attached your personhood to that person. I mean, just as Christians attach their personhood to Jesus, I think there's a parallel there with Trump, and unlike anything I've seen in my lifetime with any leader, forget just president, I've never seen this, and I do think, though, I think the evangelical church has made a Faustian bargain, and I think they're going to pay the price. Maybe not in my lifetime, but there's going to be an echo from this, because the current generation of evangelicals, they look at him and they're like, really, this is your guy? No, thanks. No, we're good. We're good staying at home. And this, Brent,
Mm-hmm.
the fastest growing group in religious polling are the nuns, NONE.
Yeah.
Those are agnostic, atheist, and unaffiliated. That's the fastest growing religious group. And I think the evangelical church is going to pay a heavy price for what the pact they've made with the devil, and I think it's going to manifest itself in my lifetime, and they deserve it. They absolutely deserve it.
I mean, I've never seen a better example of what you're talking about is than when Jeff Sessions came out in defense of the children in cages and being separated from their families, which was basically kidnapping. And he basically was like, hey, this Bible verse says that, y'all need to obey your government no matter what, because God put us here. And I was just like, holy shit, y'all. How do you not see right through this shit? They're using it to manipulate you. And they're all just like, well, if the Bible says it, I guess I gotta I don't know. I guess I gotta believe what he said. Yeah, he's right. He's right. And it's like, fucking what? Really?
I know.
Really?
I know.
Are you kidding me?
I would, if I were a seeker or whatever you call that group, and, I went into an evangelical church, or I talked to evangelical, and, you tell me, oh, yeah, he's sent from God, I'd be like, nah, I think I'll choose another God. That God's not for me,
I like that. I'll fuck them all up right there. It's like, I'll get a different God. And they're like, oh, what? There's no other what?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny. But one of the things, too, I wanted to comment on, and we were kind of alluding to it before a little bit, was the time that you had, because you've had so many cool experiences being a minister. I mean, and a lot of it is funerals and whatnot. And you did a biker funeral at one point. And I got to give it up to the bikers because, this is the type of funeral I'd like, honestly. When you were, just talking about, I was like, buried, and he was holding a bong.
Yeah. So I was kind of known as the minister in town. I would do anybody's funeral. I mean, unless you had molested a child. And so the owner of one of the funeral homes calls. He goes, "I've got one for you, Dave, but I don't think you want it." And I'm like, "Tell me, no, you don't want." So he goes, "He's a member of a biker group, and he was killed in a single car crash. He was drunk." I said, "Well, I'll do his funeral." And I had read years prior to that Robert Pirsig's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and I used that as kind of the launching pad for his eulogy. I said, when you're on a motorcycle, you experience life head on. There's no filter, there's no windshield, and talked about this guy's life like that. And it actually, I didn't write this in the book, but during the service, his buddies would just like pop up and talk and just start talking with me like I was talking to them. It was a conversation. It was kind of interesting. Cool. But what I talk about in the book, I before the service, I see these hundreds of bikers clad in all black walking in. And I just thought, I need to go see this guy that I'm about to eulogize. So I walk out, and his buddies had built his casket from scratch, which was very moving. Wow. And I peeked over into the casket, and the guy's holding his bong. I mean, he's clutching his bong. So, we get to the cemetery to do the burial, and I never did a burial more than 5 minutes. I mean, it's already a tough day. You keep it short. So his buddies approached and said, "Hey, can we burn incense?" I said, "Hey, you can burn anything you want, after I finish, and I'm going to be finished in just a few minutes." So after I had done the thing at the graveside, off in the distance, I see these guys. They're like, fuck you, God. And I'm just watching it, and I'm thinking how touching and how moving that these guys, love their friend so much that they're crying to the God, even though, he's responsible for his own death. So one of them approached me and said, "Hey, man, we're just really sorry about, what we just said." I said, "Hey, you don't need to apologize to me." I thought that was actually very touching and moving. In fact, I would even argue it's a prayer, a form of prayer. And if there is a God and that God can't handle your honesty and your cries about your friend, that's not much of a God, is it? That was a really it was a neat service. I got to tell you, I never did anyone like it.
Yeah, I honestly, I have a highlighter and I like to highlight things, and I highlighted those lines right there, and that made me so happy that you said that, because that was so cool, honestly, because that is so true.
It was really cool. They were being honest, Brent. That's just it. They were being honest with God. They were mad, and again, if there is a God, and that God can't handle their honesty, that's a small God. That's not a big God. That's a small God. And it was a cool story. I'm glad you enjoyed it in the book.
And it brings me back to this other part of the book that I really enjoyed, which was the metaphor of a parent demanding the child worship them and sing songs and confess sins and beg for forgiveness to a parent. Like, you wouldn't do that for a parent, and if any parent did that, you'd be like, that's a fucking shitty, like, crazy fucking insecure nut job of a parent, right?
Yeah, that was probably one of my favorite chapters, because I started out by saying, imagine that you're a child and you're summoned into the den with your parent, and the parent says, look, every week, at 11 o'clock, you're going to tell me what a great parent I am. You're going to sing about me. You're going to pray to me. You're going to write about me. You're going to tell me everything you did. And then next week, we're going to do it all over again, and the next and the next. Yeah, and if a parent did that, you'd be like, that parent is really messed up. But you know what? That's what happens if you're a Jew, I guess it happens on Saturday. If you're a Christian, on Sunday. That's the premise of the worship service. Yeah. And the fact that no one, can step outside of that like I did and go, this is what this looks like. This is kind of messed up.
This is shitty, man. This is what the fuck. Like,
and then let's just say the father has a drinking problem. You're not allowed to say, "Hey, Dad, what about the DWI you got last week and you crashed your car? Are we going to talk about that?" Nope. We're only going to talk about the good. You can only tell me what a good parent I am. You cannot talk about the bad.
Yeah. And there's nothing else, no one else in reality that we ever say that to, that we would ever allow ourselves to go, hey, all the good things they're responsible for, but all the bad things, no, we're not gonna, we're not even gonna talk about it, man. Wait, no, just now,
COVID,
calm down.
No. Yeah, COVID, no, we're good, God. We're only up to how many. Hundreds of thousands of people died, but we're good. Don't worry. We're not gonna talk about COVID because
that was a devil or a test. Maybe I was not you. You were great. You're always great. Like, nobody does that with anybody ever.
I know.
It's amazing.
Well, I'm glad you picked up on that, because
I loved it.
To me, that was one of my more favorite chapters, because it was pretty raw, and certainly it wasn't reverent. I didn't intend it to be. I just said, look, you know what worship looks like to me? Looks like this. If a parent brought you in and said, this is what we're going to do, that's exactly what it looks like to me.
Yeah, that was so cool. I really enjoyed that. And to close off, I want to talk about there's a couple stories from the Bible that you kind of picked at, and I honestly loved it, because these were stories that fucked with me when I was like 10 years old. Like, I knew as a 10-year-old that these were fucked up stories, and I didn't, but you don't know how to say it. You kind of like, just like, I don't know, man. Like, I guess I have to think that he's somehow the good guy in this, and that fucks with your head, man. Like,
yeah.
But so the first one is the story of Abraham and Isaac, and I was so glad that you like made a whole chapter just to that. Because that was one of the ones where I'm just like, what the fuck is going on? As a kid, I'm just like, really? Like, why would you do that? Like, to me now, because I've read the Bible a bunch of times as a Christian, and now I've read the Bible as a atheist, and I'm looking at this story, I'm going, this dude's just crazy. That's it. He's just a crazy person, that almost killed his kid. But because he saw a ram, was like, hold on, now I think that's God's message to me, and it's, okay, I changed my mind. What? Like, he's just
Yeah,
fucking crazy.
if any adult today said God has told me to kill my child, they'd be locked up. Just it, they're locked up, put away in a padded room. But because it's in the Bible, it's like, oh, and you know, the ministers will try to whitewash that. I rarely preached on that story, and if I did, I would just say, even then, I would go, look, this is a horrible story. Now, some scholars believe that it was put in the Bible, or that the story existed as a marker to show when Israel stopped sacrificing, and you realize that we don't need to sacrifice anything to God. But regardless,
because this crazy guy almost killed his kid, so we better.
Yeah. If you're a child, you know, and you're reading that story, it's kind of like the prayer that, you know, used to say at night. You know, now let me down to sleep. Pray the Lord's soul to keep. If I should die before I wake. What a horrible thought to put in a child's brain right before he goes to sleep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. Two problems there. Mom, am I going to die in my sleep?
Right.
And I don't want. Am I going to heaven if I die in my sleep tonight? I mean, it's that's the story of Abraham. No child should ever read it, and quite frankly, that neither, you know, if an adult reads it, they should easily see what you and I are talking about. But here's what's fascinating to me, Brent, is that story somehow made it into the canon, which is really it's not a flattering, you know, view of God at all, but it made it in. So if people were like, yeah, let's put that book in, I would have been, oh, wait a minute, that's not a flattering view of our God. And then, of course, the book of Job is the last chapter that you referred to.
Yeah, and that's
even worse. I mean,
the
so
gloves
God
really come off on that one, too.
Yeah, he gets lured into a bet by this character called the Satan, which in that time was not the Satan of the New Testament. The word means prosecutor in Hebrew. But, you know, the Satan comes to God, and God's like, hey, how about my boy Job? Oh, the one with the beautiful wife and the children, the camels. Yeah, he loves me. Oh, yeah, but if you take it away, he won't love you. And God takes him up on the bet and lets Satan ruin this guy's life. He fucks with him. And that's why the title of that chapter, you know, the book of Job, this God has a gambling problem, and he's a dick. And he's a dick because,
I love it.
That's my favorite. When Job protests his innocence, and Job knows he's innocent, God knows he's innocent, the reader knows he's innocent, what does God do? God doesn't say, I'm sorry, Job. No. He says, where were you when I created the world? You know, take it like a man. And that's just a dick move. I mean, you let this guy's life be ruined, and then you rub salt in the wound. I mean, what a dick. That's exactly who that is in that book. There's no redemptive view of God in that book. Even if you take the appendage, which many scholars believe was written years and hundreds of years later to make that story more palatable, he still doesn't get his original family back. They're gone. He gets a new family. But God has utterly destroyed his life, or let his life be destroyed.
He's fucking traumatized at that point. Are you kidding me? Like, he's fucking completely got PTSD, and he's fucking. Like, how are you gonna have a family with PTSD? You're just fucking with all of them. You know, it's not. Oh my God. Yeah, that was so fucked up. I was so glad that you needled it that really well, and got into the in depth kind of like how you should think about this. And you know, it was so weird because it was like I was reading my thoughts as a child back to me. You know what I mean? As if that makes any sense. Like, so like if I when I was reading those stories, it was like then your telling of that, it was just like, man, I remember thinking these things as I was reading these stories, but being like, oh, I'm not allowed to think that.
I tried to make my book more of a conversation than a lecture or whatever, and those were the things that I not only heard as a child, I hear them to this day, and I just set about to destroy them, because I don't think any of those sayings, everything happens for a reason, or God has a plan for your life, right. They're just stupid on its face, and they're people don't really realize what they're saying. But I drilled down into them. I used logic. I just used logic to dismantle them. And then I use, scholarship. And then I just use common sense. But that last chapter, no, I was very intentional about titling it that way. Because, again, there's no reading of that book in which God comes out, as a good character. There's just, you can't go there. This God is an asshole and he's a dick in the story. I'm not saying that if there is a God, that God is an asshole and dick. But in that story, and by the way, this is your book, Christians. I'm taking you on your own field. There's no defense of God. You cannot defend that God. You have to admit this God is an asshole in this story.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, he's just terrible. And I kind of wanted to ask you, have you ever seen the movie Frailty?
No.
Okay. Oh man. I feel like you'd really like this movie. So, it very much at the one point where, because we were talking about the story of Abraham, and the God told me to kill somebody, narrative, right? It really kind of it pushes that really well, and it's got Bill Paxton and Matthew McConaughey, and it's just a good movie. I think you'd really enjoy it.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Say the name of it again, Brent.
It's called Frailty.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll look that up.
It's just like a guy's like all of a sudden one day just has, oh man, I had a vision from God, and now, hey, if I put these gloves on, I can see that these people are actually demons, and then I'm going to kill them, and that's and he has his 2 kids involved, and it's fascinating. I think you'd enjoy it. I would definitely.
Yeah, I'll check that out. I mean, even when I was a minister, when somebody would say God told me, I would brace myself for crazy. Because I just would brace myself for crazy, because usually it was crazy, or it was someone trying to justify something that they were either going to do or had done. But yeah, that's again, it's crazy talk. God told me, okay, really, how do you why do I believe you? God told me the opposite, and I think,
that you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, I think in that back to the Abraham story. Obviously, you recall the way I started that chapter with a man in my town who ended up double axe murdering his wife and mother-in-law. And he was the kind of guy that would say, God told me this, God told me that. I never thought he would be an axe murderer, but I knew there was something wrong mentally with him. I never dismissed him. I never talked down to him, but he was always, God told me this, God told me that. And I would just kind of, listen, but in my mind, I'm going, this guy's crazy, but I didn't think he was. I didn't think he was actually crazy. So I don't.
No, but it's hard to tell somebody violently crazy from somebody who's just regular crazy.
But here's the deal, Brent. The reason I included that story in my book is I make the argument. Look, just because the story of Abraham is in the Bible doesn't justify it or in any way excuse somebody killing their child. I said, the story I told of this person in my town. It made People magazine because his wife, whom he axed, was had kind of become popular in the Hollywood community because she started a company that outfitted Hollywood movie sets with vintage clothing, and her company did Titanic.
That's wild.
But the only difference between him and Abraham is his story made People magazine, and Abraham's in the Bible. They're both crazy in those stories. They're both crazy. And I even go one step further to say that God in that Abraham story is crazy or off his meds.
or just a completely sociopathic, narcissist, psycho.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't even know. Like, just pile them all up. He's all of them.
Yeah,
he's all of the things you don't want to think like.
What kind of God would say, hey, prove your loyalty to me, kill your son? I mean, number one, what a crazy God. What an insecure God. I have to prove my loyalty to you. Oh, and then I've got to kill somebody to do that. Nah, I'm good. Now I'm going to go find another God because you're messed up.
Yeah.
You're not God, because by definition, God should be secure in God's self. God should not require any act of loyalty. But in the book of Abraham, that God's a small God. He's an insecure God, and he does require that. Again, in the story.
Yeah.
And that's how I treat the character. I treat him as a character in the story, and he's not a very likable character, and he's a horrible character in Job. I mean, he's a despicable character.
He's a horrible character all through the Old Testament, and I would argue even in the New. But, he's terrible. But it's like you're constantly told that you have to, like, think of things through this weird filter that says God is always good. God is always good. God is always good.
Yeah.
You have to, like, read it through that weird filter You know, until you're like, okay, I guess God is always good, even though he's fucking, telling them to rape people. I mean, like, there was what was the the Ammonites? I want to say. Anyway, it was like one group of this one people. They was like saying, kill every man, woman, and child, and keep the virgin women as yourselves. Or for yourselves, and it's like that's sex slavery, man. Like there's no, and all the Bible scholars agree that's sex slavery, man. Like and that's how do you rectify? Because I remember like looking at here or talking to people and them saying that sex slavery is part of the Bible and being like, no, fuck you, man. No, it's not. No, it's not.
Oh no,
that is not.
Yeah,
true.
There's a lot of stuff in the Bible that
it's
people.
Fucked. Yeah.
They're things that are just absolutely messed up and crazy and immoral and amoral. But Christians and Jews tend to either overlook or whitewash those, but they're there. And that's when I take people on, and you're going to appeal to your book. Well, then I'm going to use your book to argue against you and exactly. to point out, what a despicable character your God is in some parts of the Old Testament. So. If you want to go there, let's talk about Abraham. Let's talk about Job, because your God in those stories does not come out well.
Yeah. Well, hey man, thank you so much for coming on this show. Holy shit, this has been a lot of fun. And so, is there any place you want to plug? I mean, I'm going to put the book in the show notes and stuff like that. But is there any way that the listeners can find you or?
Yeah, thank you, Brent. So I've enjoyed this as well. I really appreciate you having me on. So you can buy my book on Amazon.com and just put in DB Ramsey, Speaking of God. That'll pull it up. Or you can go to my website, which is dbramsey.com, and there is a link on my book's website. You can order it from there. It'll take you to Amazon. So, and I would say if you read it, review it. Even if you hate it, review it because, those reviews actually – drive ratings of books, and my book has actually had reached number one in both in the agnostic and atheist category. It's a fluid kind of thing, so it's been in and out, but it's been very well received, and I really appreciate those that have read it, and I appreciate you reading it, Brandon, having me on your show, and it's been a pleasure. So thank you again. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, man, this has been really great. So check it out. We have this weird sign-off, right, where I'm going to say who we're going to say fuck off to, and then both you and me say fuck off together, okay?
Okay.
I know, it's weird. But, so, what do we say to the haters, discriminators, and masturbator shamers? Fuck off.